Hey, welcome back. Lecture 6.2. Let's just flip to here. Rationality versus emotion, in quotes. You're going to see it's more than emotion. What I want to do is we're going to be talking about conscious and unconscious influences. We already have been talking about conscious and unconscious influences. I want to connect this to some of what you've learned about the brain. And in so doing, I think hopefully also clarify how at least most psychologists, most experimental psychologists, think of this distinction between conscious and unconscious influences. It in part has to do with what parts of the brain are involved, but it also has to do with the sorts of behaviors each part of the brain oversees, controls, etc. Okay, so let's get into it. Rationality versus emotion. I'm just going to jump right in. And we're going to jump right in by focusing on the frontal lobes. So, just about all of the thoughts, like when we think, if we go back to sort of Wundt, I guess, introspecting on your conscious experience, when we think of your conscious experience, the thoughts that you have, especially at least the ones that you are aware of, all of those thoughts tend to be frontal lobe sorts of thoughts. They have to do with things we're trying to achieve, so what we call goal states, a sort of acknowledgement of what's out there, what is our world, what is our situation, and how can we get from where we are to where we want to be. Like, how can we make some of these goals come true? And, we can even think of something like you going through university. What's probably on your mind a lot is, you'd like a great job, and so you want to get a degree and hopefully do well in your university courses. And so that leads to other challenges within each course, keeping in mind when all the various assessments are, getting your work done in time, and those are the sorts of thoughts probably going through your head. Oh, I've got an assignment due for this class, and I got to remember to do this, and blah, blah, blah. This is all frontal lobe stuff, right? And we're very sort of intimately familiar with this. We have these thoughts kind of rolling along. They are our internal companion, and they are sort of us. So what I'm saying here at the bottom is we, a sense of who we are and what we're about. We're often at the center of the thoughts, right? It's our goals, it's our beliefs, it's the things that we want to realize in the world. And so our thoughts are about us. We are kind of in the starring role of our own consciousness. And that can sort of result in us thinking, okay, this is what the brain is doing. This is it. The stuff that I'm aware of, the stuff that I'm thinking of. But again, I want to be really clear that what you mostly think about is frontal lobe kind of stuff. Strategies, plans, getting ready for something, etc. Those sorts of things. And yes, that's true that the brain does that. But there's all this other brain. And now we've talked about some of the cortical areas as more interested in input from the world. That's true. But there's also all these very primitive, let's just jump to them. The limbic system. The real midbrain kind of structures, these are very primitive. They have been around forever. All animals have these sorts of structures. They don't all have good frontal lobes. We're mostly different from other animals in the sense of having really highly developed and complex frontal lobes. But we all have the same primitive limbic system. And this limbic system has been keeping us alive for many, 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 many years. It's been around and it evolved long before the frontal lobes did. So the frontal lobes are kind of the new kid in town, sitting there on top of a very primitive brain. And this primitive brain, so let me just unpack this a little bit. It is the source of all of our emotional reactions. And I say fight or flight. I mean, literally, all input, the input that you're aware of, but also the input that you're not aware of, all input comes to this part of the brain. And for example, the amygdalas, those little almond-shaped structures, they are scanning this input for threat, because this is the part of the brain trying to keep us alive. So it's always looking for danger. And if it finds danger, if anything feels threatening, it kicks in that fight-flight response. You know about that. But let me tell you another step that you don't know about. the notion is the original thing is that fight flight response, but then it gives way to an emotional state. And that emotional state is the result of what we call an attribution process. So the claim is this, yes, if a bear steps up in front of you, that's a threat. Okay. But so too are good things that we might not think about. Say you feel like there's this person you just met, and every time you're around that person, you feel, those same feelings we've associated with anxiety or whatever, but it's not anxiety. It feels much more pleasant than anxiety. We might call it love. You're falling in love. But what's going on with love? So first of all, realize that when you fall in love, it starts with threat, right? Once you start to realize, I know this person. I like this person. I want to get to know them better. They could become an important part of my life. Yes, they could. They could also become the next thing that totally depresses you, right? So when you're stepping into a potential life, moving from life as sort of a single person to one who may be in some sort of relationship, there's risk associated with that. You could get your heart broken. Literally, you could be, maybe this person won't like you at all back, etc. But let's say they do like you back. So the notion is it's that risk that kicks off a sort of fight flight. You feel that same, now it's not really fight, but it's like approach, avoid, right? Do I go towards this thing that's got me feeling this way, or do I get away from it? So sort of like a fight or flight. But the reason it's not fight is it's not a bear, right? When your higher level brain regions sort of analyze, why am I feeling that way? What is it? They kind of think, because I'm in the presence of this person that I find attractive and that I'd like to get to know better. And that turns the fight into something else. Okay. Let me give you another example. A lottery ticket. Say you have a lottery ticket and they put the winning numbers on the TV and you're looking at your numbers. And as you go through your numbers, you're going, oh my God. At some level, you're starting to see you have all the numbers. At first, you're going to feel this, and that's because it's a threat, right? If you have all the numbers, your life is about to change in a dramatic way. And while, it probably will be good, at first, the primitive brain regions see this as a threat. The sort of life I know is it may be coming to an end, and that could be potentially dangerous. But as you think about the situation and you think, oh my God, I have all the numbers, I'm going to get millions of dollars, I can do whatever I want, then that original sort of fight flight becomes ecstasy, right? It becomes woohoo. And so the claim is that almost every emotional state starts in this limbic system. And then as the brain kind of tries to understand what is stirring me up, what is the threat that's out there, some threats turn out to be scary threats, and then we feel fear. Some threats turn out to be nice, warm threats, and we feel love. Other threats turn out to be life-changing lottery ticket wins, and we feel, ecstasy at being rich, etc. And so this is the source. I want to be very careful. This is the source of all the emotional reactions. Really, that sort of fight-flight that is the beginning of where these emotional reactions begin. Because anything that challenges our current way of being is a threat, okay? And then it resolves to an emotion. We're going to talk more about emotions and how they come about later in the course. And this isn't the critical thing I want here, other than for you to kind of understand this is where a lot of emotionality comes from. But this is the more critical point. This part of the brain region can also automatically trigger and control behaviors based on instinct or habit. So let me talk about instinct, because this is going to come up when we get into the learning chapter, and especially when we talk about classical conditioning. Classical conditioning will start by saying, hey, there are certain behaviors that we have that are pre-wired. They're built right into us. And one example of this would be if you're standing there and somebody, throws a tennis ball towards your head, let's say. That's kind of nasty. So let's say it's a Nerf ball, so it's not so tough, but they throw a Nerf ball at your face. What you will see is just about every one of us will do the following. Close our eyes, move our head back out of the way, raise our hands. Shielding, okay? We're protecting ourselves, from that projectile that's coming at us. We have all of these natural instincts. A baby right from birth starts rooting for the nipple to get food. That's it doesn't have to learn to do that. It's not trial and error where it figures out. The baby is born with that instinct to root for food right from birth. We have all of these instincts that are pre-wired, and they're sort of triggered by this part of the brain. Okay, and classical conditioning will talk about how we can build upon those instincts. We're not going to talk about that now, but just know that these instinctual behaviors are there. And also, what I'm going to focus on a little more perhaps is the habitual behaviors. When we turn a behavior into a habit, then it ultimately gets controlled by this. So, give you a bad example of that. Let's say that you had a habit of smoking cigarettes, and every morning at 10:30, that would be smoke break time. So when the clock got to be 10:30, you got up and you went outside and you had a smoke. Okay. If you did this over and over again for a long time, your brain would start to just connect all of this stuff. And it could sort of control your behavior automatically. At 10:30, remember, every input comes through the brain. So you might not even be consciously aware that it's 10:30, but part of your brain is. It knows that it's 10:30. It craves that cigarette. Next thing you know, you're up walking down the hallway going for a cigarette. If someone says, "Hey, where are you going?" you might actually have to stop and think. You might have to go, "Oh, I'm going outside for a cigarette." But your brain and body were just doing it habitually. And that becomes the problem, right? If you suddenly want to quit having a cigarette, now it's the frontal lobes against your habits. You've built these habits. These habits want to just do what they've always done. And you now have to say, no, you cannot have that cigarette right now. You must stay in the seat. You cannot go outside with your friends and smoke a cigarette. Once the habit's in place, it's hard to defeat because it's part of this core brain area that's controlling things, okay? This kind of thing we're going to associate with unconscious influences. Let me slow that. So go back to the frontal lobes. These are the conscious influences, right? These are the things that the consciously influenced behaviors. These are behaviors we do because we've decided we want to do it. It's going to help us reach some goal. We sometimes call those controlled behaviors, consciously controlled behaviors. And so we need our frontal lobes to kind of help guide us. You know, it's the frontal lobes that pushes you to study because you have a goal of doing well on an exam, etc. And so sitting down, telling yourself, I have to sit down, I have to study, I have to do this, that would be controlled. And your frontal lobes are doing that. But things that come from here are unconscious influences. They are controlled by the environment. The environment triggers these behaviors, and we don't even have to be aware of the trigger that's there. It just happens automatically, and that's what makes them unconsciously mediated, unconscious behaviors. Okay, let me try to unpack that a little bit more. We can take this distinction between the conscious and the unconscious mind, and we can kind of think of it as frontal lobes versus limbic system. The frontal lobes oversees the conscious. Well, this is where the conscious mind is. This is where all your conscious thinking is happening. And that results in behavior in two different contexts. So we talk about this. And I didn't highlight this one yet, but let me actually highlight this one because it'll be part of our example I'm going to show you in a second. When you encounter some new challenge, you know, let's say somebody says, "Hey, do you want to play cricket?" And I might say, "I've seen cricket a little bit. I don't really understand it. It looks kind of interesting. I have no idea how to do it. If you'll tell me what to do, I will try to play cricket." And so someone says, "Okay, well, here's a mallet. You stand over here. Here's how to hold the mallet. Here's how to swing the mallet. And here's what you're trying to accomplish as you do that." And so at first, when we've never done this before, we often look very close. How do I hold it? Oh, you hold it like that? Okay. So I'm using conscious processes now. I'm watching you. I have the goal of hitting this ball well, and I've never done it before. So I'm watching you. I'm mimicking your hand placement. And I might say, "Show me how you swing it." And I see how you swing it, and I think, okay, that's how I have to swing it. So I have to try to do that. And when do I swing? Well, swing when the ball's about this close to you. Oh, or when it leaves his hand, that's when you should start swinging or something like that. Okay, so at first, I'm going to be doing all of this in a very conscious way because that's the only way I know. I've never done it before. I don't have any instincts that are going to help me. I don't have any habits that are going to help me. Okay. Now, if I do this over and over, the more I play cricket and the more I swing, the more I'm going to transition from this being a consciously controlled new behavior to one where I've got a developed habit. Okay. Eventually it's going to become a habit, and somebody who's played a lot doesn't worry about how they hold it, doesn't really worry that much about how they swing it. Most of that, it just feels automatic to them now. They've done it so many times, they just know how. And they're probably thinking consciously about other things, not about, the specifics of the behavior. But when we've never done the behavior before, now we need the conscious mind to help us do it the first time and the first few times, right? We'll come back to this point. The other place is the one I've been highlighting all through. When we're acting in accord with our consciously held goals, there's certain things we want to achieve in life. These could be social goals we have. These could be academic goals. These could be professional goals. All sorts of things. There are things we would like to accomplish. This could include the way people view us, the way people think of us, all of that kind of stuff. And so so when we decide, we want to do something to achieve some strategic goal, that's the conscious mind doing that. Okay. And we call those, again, controlled behaviors. When you're sort of at the wheel and deciding to do something because it's going to help you reach some goal that you have now. That's what the conscious mind does. New things and goal-directed things. The unconscious mind, or the limbic system, anytime we're responding in instinctual ways, so I talked to you about protecting ourselves, and there's all sorts of instincts that we're going to talk about more of these, but especially habits. When we've developed habits that can then be triggered by the environment without conscious mediation. Okay. William James, one of the figures that we talked about a little bit in chapter 1, wrote a book about habits. And he was a big claim that said, hey, you know what? You can, if you develop habits in a mindful way, he didn't use the word mindful, I don't think, but if you develop habits in a mindful way, you can have these habits help you, make your life easier for you. They will get the right thing done without you even having to think about it. Isn't that cool? Okay, let me walk you through what William James, the sort of idea he had as a way of trying to tie some of this stuff together. William James would say the following. Let's say you're one of those people that always loses your keys. You never know where they are. Why? Well, because you tend to leave them in different places. Sometimes you leave them in your coat pocket. Sometimes you throw them on the table over there. Sometimes, they end up in your pocket when you're on the couch and they don't feel comfortable and you take them out and put them on some little table. Sometimes you bring them to your bedroom and throw them somewhere, etc. And so now you're looking for the keys and you're like, I can never find my stupid keys. And William James comes along and says, that's no problem. We can solve this. Here's how we're going to do it. So here's our example. First of all, we're going to get a something like this, something with some hooks on it that we can put right by the door. And then all you have to do is for about 2 to 3 to 4 weeks, people talk about how long it takes to form a habit. It varies. I don't think we have a really good answer. But for a while, you have to intentionally, you would have to tell yourself, okay, when I come home, when I step through the door, I'm going to take my keys and I'm going to put them on that hook. Okay. And you're going to have to really think about that the first time. So it's going to have to be consciously controlled at first because it's not a habit yet. Right. And so your goal is to form a habit. And so now you say, okay, to reach that goal, Professor Jordan's told me that I just have to day after day for a number of weeks, walk in and put my keys in that same location. It doesn't have to be a hook. It just has to be a location that you pick. I'm going to put my keys there. Now, after you do that enough, 2 or 3 or 4 weeks, who knows, this will start to happen automatically. You will walk in the door, grab your keys, put them on the hook, and continue on your business. And you won't even have thought about doing it. It will be habit. But then what will also be habit is when you're leaving, you'll be going to the door and reaching for your keys and having them with you, and you've never lost your keys again. They are always where they should be because you took the time to develop a habit of putting them there. And when you take the time to develop that habit, so William James was big on saying, hey, for a lot of the little annoying things in life, we can sort of program habits into ourselves so our body does these things in an automatic, unconscious way. You no longer have to mess your brain with, where's my keys? Where was I last? Could they be upstairs? Could they, James would say that was all unnecessary thought. Save your thought for real problems. If you just learn the habit of putting your keys in the same place every day, then you will get to the point where it's a habit and you'll never waste conscious effort thinking about where your keys are again. And so he was a big fan of, we should all be creating as many of these sorts of habits as we can, and having these positive habits kind of carry us through life. We can coast on the habits. We do this automatically anyway. When you walk around the hallway, I don't know if you've ever noticed this, but if you put a winter jacket on when winter season comes, you might find that when you're going around corners, your jacket is actually hitting the corner, touching the corner. And that's because when you're not wearing a jacket, your body learns how to just go around corners and how to just put your foot high enough on each stair as it goes. And it learns these things, and then it does it naturally. It becomes a habit. And we don't even notice how close we're cutting things until we have that jacket on with the extra couple centimeters. And then suddenly we're like rubbing on stuff and we go, oh, wow, I've really cut that close. And so here is a controversial claim made by many. How many, if we said what % of the behaviors you do are controlled consciously? Do you consciously think about your walking when you're walking? Probably not. Your mind is elsewhere. What about when you're driving your car? Do any of you guys drive a stick shift? Have you seen people drive stick shifts? They can talk and have conversations and do all sorts of things while shifting gears and doing brakes and accelerating and doing everything you do in a car, blinkers at the right time, etc. We have reached a point where all of that stuff has become habit. If you drive for a while and your body just does it, and you can consciously be somewhere else. You can be having a conversation with the person beside you, etc. And everything's fine unless something unusual happens. Habits are really good when everything is happening the way it should. But if somebody runs out into the road, you suddenly have to consciously take control of that habit. You cannot allow your habitual driving to be in control. You have to consciously get in there and prevent it from doing the habit, which is just driving along. We have to slam on our brakes because somebody's just gone in front of our car. So that example is showing how habit and conscious control kind of dance with each other, right? And so a lot of the time, our behavior is controlled by habits that just get us through life perfectly fine. We have sometimes some bad habits that we wish we'd have to reshape. That's a whole other question. But we have all of these habits carrying us through. But on top of that, every now and then we consciously decide to behave certain ways. And that's almost always because it helps us achieve some goal. So yeah, think about your day and ask yourself, of the things I do, how many of the things I do are reflecting my conscious decision to do that? And how many of them are just happening? How many of it is just controlled by the unconscious parts of the brain? Okay. Final word on how I've described all this to you. The unconscious I've just described, instinct, habit, is shall we call it a dumb unconscious? The habits are just triggered by the environment. It's not some being inside of you. So, sometimes when you hear about unconscious influences, especially Freudian kind of stories of unconscious influences, you get the sense that they're up to stuff. They're trying to protect your conscious mind, or they're doing whatever, etc. Most psychologists do not believe in an intelligent unconscious, an unconscious that has its own goals, for example. No, we believe that we have the goals, and that's our conscious mind, and that the unconscious stuff that we're doing reflects things like habit, where a stimulus triggers us to go for our cigarette break. It's not up to anything. It's not trying to achieve any goal. It's just we've done that so many times, it's become a habit. And these habits then just can take over our behavior and control us, but not in weird, sneaky ways, usually in ways that kind of fit our life and help us achieve some goal, like not losing our keys. Okay, so I'll let you think about all that. We're going to jump into the chapter proper now as we go through, but I may every now and then come back to that little model I showed you of conscious, unconscious, and I may come back to this distinction between frontal lobes and the limbic system. Okay, that's it for now. Bye-bye.